Hi there, my name is Jon Hutman. I'm a motion picture production designer, and today we're going to talk about a TV show that I designed called The West Wing. The visual style of the show is there are two different kinds of scenes. There are the scenes where you have people sitting down talking to each other, and then you have these infamous Steadicam walk and talks. So it was very important that this be a set that we could move through, that there were all different kinds of paths through the set. And if you notice, there is Tom Del Ruth's signature lighting, which is these can lights with spots. So people walking down the hall, it's not just a brightly lit corridor. They go in and out of these pops of light. So you're light and dark and light and dark, and it creates a kind of pace to the movement through the sets.
God, please let this be a national emergency.
Now, one interesting fact, when we originally designed and built these sets, we didn't have a stage that was big enough for the entire set. So the set was designed and built on two separate stages, next to each other, but not connected. What I did is I added what I call the gold connecting corridor between the lobby and the Roosevelt Room. What I was trying to do is create a kind of scale and a level of architectural detail that could bridge the formality of the lobby, the Roosevelt Room, and the Oval Office in contrast to the other corridors which have lower ceilings, and the lower ceiling corridors are the ones where you see these can spotlights. And what that allowed you to do is go out of the lobby, and there's two double doors at the front and two double doors at the back, and the ones on the right go to Josh's bullpen, and then the other side, front and back, go to the gold corridor. And what you can do is either go from front double doors to back double doors and into the other set, or vice versa. And that same gold corridor was built on the other stage connected to the Roosevelt Room. So that would take you past the Roosevelt Room to the communications bullpen, to Mrs. Landingham's office, she's the president's secretary, to the Oval Office, and then on the other side of the Oval Office is Leo's office, he's the chief of staff. At the very end of the gold corridor is Margaret's office, and what you might remember is John Spencer, who played Leo, going, "Margaret! Margaret!" and walking through the corridor and going through Margaret's office into his office. And so Leo's got his desk, and there's a conference table, and there's a TV.
Is there anything I can say other than the president rode his bicycle into a tree?
He hopes never to do it again.
We also get to see in this episode Josh's office, which is on one side of the lobby. The idea with Josh's office is that it's a little more dated and old school. Josh, being the deputy chief of staff, gets an office with a window, but there's this bullpen in the center which has these half glass partitions, and that's where Donna, who is Josh's assistant, has her desk. And Leo comes in there, and you get to see, like, there's old school file cabinets and these drilled acoustical tiles with clocks with the different time zones across them. It feels a little bit more like a newspaper office. It's definitely behind the scenes practical. And then on the other side of the lobby, on the other side of the Roosevelt Room, we have the communications bullpen. And that's where CJ, Toby, and Sam have their offices. And their offices have the exterior traditional windows, but they have these kind of floor to ceiling glass walls separating them from their bullpen. It's not modern like Apple Computer, but it's a more contemporary renovation of the space within this building.
Josh!
I'd never done a TV show before. I was designing a movie called 13 Days, which is about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and it took place in the White House during the Kennedy era. We had managed to get our hands on the sets that had been designed by Lily Kilvert for a movie called The American President. And we were going to kind of repurpose them and convert them. The line producer of the movie came to me and said, there is this TV show that wants to shoot a pilot on our White House set. In the meantime, the movie shut down. Now I'm talking to Aaron Sorkin and John Wells about the White House. They hired me. Basically, we picked up where we left off from what was going to be the 13 Days set and made it into the West Wing set. So here I am trying to figure out how to design a TV show. At the moment where we made this pilot, there was a lot of interest in what was going on behind the scenes at the White House. And you know, so many movies like, here we are in the Oval Office, here's the president making a decision. You know, everybody's image of the West Wing would come from the Oval Office, which is formal, neoclassical, very deep, saturated, what I would call Ralph Lauren colors. For our purposes, I was really interested in what do people imagine the West Wing looks like. The Roosevelt Room is a great example. Obviously, I worked very closely with Tommy Schlamme. He's one of the executive producers and he directed the pilot. I'm going to say that he invented the visual style of that show. So one of the first things Tommy and I talked about looking at the layout of the actual West Wing is if you look at the Roosevelt Room, which is kind of in the center of the action, and you look at the Cabinet Room, you have two conference rooms next to each other. It was very clear from the way that Aaron had outlined that the cabinet and the members of the president's cabinet were not going to play in this series. So we stuck with the Roosevelt Room, and Tommy said, I need to open it up. Having a room with no windows doesn't help me. So we came up with the idea of lining the solid walls with the room with these French doors, which allowed us to see through and out and connect what was happening on either side of the Roosevelt Room. And then I put these columns in, which Tom Del Ruth put his signature incandescent warm glow behind the columns. We took this very plain white windowless conference room, painted it this beautiful, warm, kind of rust terracotta color, and suddenly it's the heart of the West Wing. We now no longer needed the cabinet room because we had a conference room, and what we put in the space that the cabinet room occupies is what we called the mural room. And the mural room came from American President, but it was actually a dining room in the residence of the president, and we added it into our West Wing because we felt that that was a more visually rich, intimate, formal space for meetings. So in the pilot, the mural room, what's important dramatically in the episode is that's the first time that we meet President Bartlett.
Then what's the first commandment?
I am the Lord your God. Thou shalt worship no other God before me.
You know, there are couches there, and there's a fireplace there, and there's this beautiful historical mural, and the room is dark and it has these rich colors. That's the right setting for the scene. So what I got to do as a production designer is to bring some of that texture, some of that feeling into the variety of spaces within the West Wing.
You can all get your fat asses out of my White House.
The grand lobby, which is not the opening set of the pilot. There's a sequence where we follow Rob Lowe playing Sam. Lisa Edelstein, her character's name is Lori, says, you got a page, your friend has a funny name. And Sam says, it's not my friend, it's my boss. And it's not his name, it's his title.
POTUS?
President of the United States.
You just go like, yes! And you cut to this top shot. You see Leo walking in over the presidential seal, entry to the lobby, and you walk him through this grand lobby. That lobby once was the actual lobby of the West Wing. Over time, starting, I believe, under President Nixon, they needed more real estate in the West Wing. So when I went to the White House, I was a little bit disappointed to see what had once been this grand lobby with columns was now literally a third of the size. It's a little reception room. Space is at a total premium in the White House. And what I found was that what I thought was going to be these like grand, impressive offices that matched the Oval Office were these little subdivided cubicles with plain white walls and blue carpet. There is a huge office building across the street called the Old Executive Office Building. If you work for the president, the status symbol is to have even a windowless cubicle in the West Wing.
Is this for real or is this just funny?
Apparently it's neither.
One of the big differences between a movie where you have a 120-page script, let's say, and you know from the script exactly what parts of the White House you're going to see. On a TV show, you have to not only look at the pilot episode, but then you look at the outline of the sets for the rest of that series. And you have to think going forward, what is the rest of this show going to look like? I wanted to create a framework that could expand and grow. And one of the things that I thought was important to do, especially for The West Wing, was to create a hierarchy of rooms within that place.
Of the same suit you wore yesterday?
Yeah. You? Yeah.
One thing that I learned is that the Oval Office in particular tends to get redecorated by each president in their own style. So the style that we used in the West Wing was the current style from the Clinton White House. So that blue presidential carpet and the red and white striped sofas are very signature from the Clinton White House. The desk is what's known as the Kennedy desk because John F. Kennedy used the desk, and there's a very famous picture of Kennedy sitting at his desk and little John Kennedy, when he was something like 4 or 5 years old, peeking his head out. There's a little trapdoor in the front of the desk, and that was Bartlett's desk. One thing that I remember is that when we went to pick up the pieces of the American President set, we discovered that the Oval Office set, which is very tall, someone had literally chopped off the top of the set because it was like too tall to drive on the freeway or something like that. So like not cleanly cut, like, but those things were very helpful because we literally designed and built that set in 8 weeks, which is like record time. And I only did the pilot. Ken Hardy took over as the production designer. I kind of kibitzed a little bit, but it was his baby, and Ellen Totleben was the set decorator. There is another crazy story about the West Wing and about this set. At some point, I got the opportunity through John Wells to come back and direct an episode of The West Wing, which is called Gone Quiet. And the amazing thing that happened while I was prepping that episode, I was in the set making notes and drawing little diagrams and Tommy Schlamme shows up with Bill Clinton, who is the most charming and charismatic guy you can imagine. And he like proceeded to walk us through the set and say like, this painting used to hang here and this painting was here and whatever. You know, here's what's really fun about making movies. You never know who you're going to get to meet. You know, you always get a little peek into what goes on behind the scenes, which is what we try to share with you here. I'm curious to hear what you thought about that. Would love to know what you liked, what else you'd like to know, if there are other TV shows you'd like for me to talk about. If you haven't already liked and subscribed, please do so.